My father passed away peacefully on March 14th, 2020 in Mexico, surrounded by his family at the age of 89. 3 days later, I was flying home to Toronto on one of the last flights into Canada, into a nation that would be turned on its head. 15 days to flatten the curve. We all remember those infamous words. As a church community, we were willing and quick to cooperate with this mandate, despite some misgivings about the lack of consultation from any authorities when decisions and orders that affected us came fast and furious. We discussed how to best assist the health officials, especially in our small town of Elmer, Ontario, in dealing with the massive number of deaths that were apparently imminent. We suspended all church services and church activities as we were directed to do, refrained from visiting each other and reducing exposure in person wherever we could. We had solid support from the congregants to do our best to stop the spread. Everyone was on board to make themselves available to assist wherever possible during this sudden disease that had descended upon us. 15 days passed, and we were very relieved that the plague had spared our town. To God be the glory. We were anxiously waiting for the news to come out that we had been spared the worst and there would be a path back to normal. As we were awaiting the breaking news, we were surprised by the flippant response of the authorities. Instead of a report of good news, they ignored the reality and promises of the past 2 weeks and instead came up with the grim requirement that they needed more time to flatten the curve, this time with no end in sight. This seemed quite puzzling to us. How is it that the grocery store parking lot next to our church is crowded as usual? The liquor store parking lot is buzzing. Abortion clinics are open. But the church parking lot must be vacant by order of the health unit. Finally, they told us flat out, church is not essential, you see. This struck a nerve and quickly brought Scripture to mind. Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together. In other words, the church must gather. How could this be? 2 weeks to flatten the curve? Yes, we can do that. We can do 2 weeks without physically praying together, singing together, without corporate worship. Even counseling can wait a bit, or can be done over the phone for 2 weeks, and visiting the elderly and the hurting can be postponed by a bit, as they too understand the gravity of this situation. Deeming church not essential while keeping the liquor, marijuana, and coffee shops open was a step too far. Our close-knit, biblically grounded community could not accept that lie. Then when there is trouble and upheaval in the world, a faithful church community has always played an important role, regardless of the risks, to love our neighbor as ourselves, namely, comforting the afflicted, speaking hope to the fearful, offering prayer for the hurting, and a shoulder to lean on for the mourning. We proved the fear narrative surrounding COVID to be a lie in the middle of 2020 when we introduced the drive-in services. These services were held in our parking lot. People did not exit their cars and tuned into the outdoor stage via FM radio, and the police tried to shut it down after receiving a few Facebook complaints. The police pulled up, interrupted the services, which is against the law in Canada, walking around and scanning the license plates of each car, preparing to ticket the people for sitting in the car with their windows rolled up, their Bibles on their lap. By God's grace, we never had one single case of COVID traced back to our community during the entire pandemic. The Lord knows they tried their best to implicate us, branded us plague rats, and lined the road in front of our church every Sunday with some of the most hateful protesters any of us have ever seen. In fact, we didn't have a single funeral between 2019 and 2023. We're not ashamed that our county had the lowest vaccination rate. We literally saved lives. Scriptures of our treasured book called the Bible flashed before us. We must obey God rather than man. We will not bow down to this image. Our God whom we serve is able. I'm not mad, I'm just passionate. Our refusal to bow to the lies dealt by our governments and media culminated in months of weekly tickets from the police, surveillance of my family and church services by a domestic terrorism unit, the Superior Court ordering a seizure of our church property and locking the doors by force for months on end, and me personally facing over 50 million in fines and 15 years in prison for simply keeping our church doors open to those who wanted to be there. This period of turmoil showcased a tremendous failure in public policy in the U.S. and Canada. Laws and mandates were rammed through parliaments and legislatures with little consideration for cherished constitutional principles and civil liberties. Politicians, doctors, and nurses who spoke out were canceled, shamed, and made out to be villains by the press and online mobs. Thank you for each one of you that stood up. I thank God for you. It is our duty to speak up and speak out boldly, to remind our lawmakers and governments to never repeat these mistakes again. Public policy must reflect truth and respect fundamental freedoms given to us by our Creator. If you have influence in your community or serve in any elected office, whether municipal, state, province, or federal in the U.S. and Canada, I implore you to take active steps now to prevent this from ever happening again. We need massive reforms to remove the power of public health units, medical officers of health, and the alphabet soup of agencies in government to unilaterally infringe on the freedoms of citizens to make their own choices when it comes to their bodies, their families, and their faith. I am reminded of the words of my dear friend and brother, Stephen Hargrave, in his book, Hustling Backward. Civil governments have often withheld rights from their citizens, which nature and humanity demand. Civil governments have often extended rights to their citizens, which nature and humanity do not. Civil governments grant rights which transgress humanity while removing human rights in the name of civility. I end with the words spoken by German reformer Martin Luther in 1521. Here I stand. I can do no other, so help me God. Thank you.